Morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Father Dustin, and I am a priest here in the Diocese of Pensacola, Tallahassee, and work and serve at a place called Joseph House, and also am an executive board member with Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition here at CPMC. We're glad to have all of you joining us for today's town hall. This year, we are at CPMC kind of thinking of how to do things differently in terms of ministry to those that are incarcerated, those impacted by the criminal justice system, reimagining things differently according to the gospel. What does it mean to do the work that in the service that so many of us are doing? But perhaps showing others and certainly our larger society of how we can do things differently in a more compassionate and more merciful way. And I know that a number of you are joining us perhaps for the first time with one of these town hall meetings after our the event, the conference that we had back in December. And so we welcome you to our monthly town hall meetings that we have every month here at CPMC. And today we have a great lineup, in my humble opinion, as I'm one of the members of the lineup, but no. Joined by a few others here that I'm looking forward to, I think, what will be a rich conversation on different ways, reimagining the work of reentry and reintegration for our sisters and brothers returning home from prison. And so as we think about new beginnings for those that are coming back and joining us in society, and new beginnings for us as a church as to what it means to be a community that welcomes the stranger, that welcomes back our sisters and brothers as they come back into society. But as always, let us first begin this town hall meeting with prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Compassionate Father, you are the source of all that is good. Father, you gather us together through your Son into this new community that you have imagined us to accompany each other. We pray that you would bless all of the ministries, the vocations, the communities represented in this town hall, that you would continue to show us the way to accompany our sisters and brothers that are coming home from prison. We pray that you would bless this day and all of those whom we serve. We pray all of this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, the Son, the Spirit. Okay, well, so the way that this town hall will proceed is that we have myself and two other panelists, presenters joining me. And I will introduce each individually, and then they will present the ministry, the work that they're doing in reentry. And then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A and a discussion following these presentations. So if you have if any questions or comments or thoughts kind of come up along the way that you would like to share, please feel free to use the chat box. And just send a chat to us, a question, comment, a thought, whatever, and then we'll probably get to that at the second half of the town hall meeting. So first, I would like to introduce Jim Bloom. Jim Bloom is the founder, CEO, and executive director of My Father's House in Denver, Colorado. Jim graduated with a bachelor's of music with a concentration in education from Colorado State University in 1991, and with a master's of arts in theology from Catholic Distance University in 2008. Jim has worked as an elementary school teacher, a professional singer, and a classical music radio host in Denver, having served 20 years in the Colorado Department of Corrections. Jim recognized the need for a ministry to help men with practical needs as they get out of prison, but even more for companionship and community as they move into a new way of thinking and living. To meet these needs, Jim founded My Father's House, a 501c3 nonprofit ministry and transitional housing and reentry community for men on parole. And Jim founded that in 2017. So welcome, Jim. And I turn over the proverbial mic to you so that we can hear more about My Father's House.
Thank you very much, Father. It's an honor to be asked to be here, and I appreciate the introductions. Very gracious. So yes, I did spend 20 years in prison here in Colorado, and I went into prison as a young man, and pretty stupid and arrogant young man at that. I thought I had the world by the tail, and quickly realized that I did not, and began to ask myself sort of the big questions about life, like how did I get here, and how did I get myself into this situation? What has brought me here? And I began to try to examine myself, trying to figure out what makes me tick. Why do I do the things that I do, and how can I change the way that I behave? I came back. I had left the church when I was young, and had been away from the church for many years, and living a pretty dysfunctional life. I came back to my faith while I was in prison, and began to study informally, and then more formally, I got my master's in theology while I was in prison via correspondence course. That was a great grace. It was a beautiful spiritual journey. And so during that time also, though, I was sort of studying the human condition. Why do people do the things they do? Especially why do I do the things I do, and how can I be a better man? And so in order to do that, I began to talk to my fellow prisoners and ask them, how did you get here? What's brought you to this place? And I would talk also with men who had been out on parole, and then they would get sent back, or they would commit a new crime or whatever it was. And so they'd go out and come back and out and come back. And I would ask them about that, and was trying to figure out, why do men come back? What makes that happen? And what I figured out, what I figured out was that it wasn't necessarily the logistical problems. It wasn't housing or transportation or a job. Those things were difficult, and they did struggle with that, but they figured those pieces out. What would happen is that the problem came with communication. They would be in relationship with some important person in their life, whether it was a parole officer, a treatment provider, maybe their landlord, their boss, maybe their mom or their girlfriend, whoever, and the communication would break down. And then as a result of that, they would begin to relapse into old behaviors, dysfunctional ways of behaving, and eventually, potentially then relapse into some sort of criminal behavior and wind up back in prison. And so it's that socialization and that communication aspect that's really very important. People these men and I needed to learn to listen to what was being said to us and really take in what's happening here, and then to be able to express our thoughts and feelings. And so I began to talk with men about that, and that is really at the heart of what My Father's House's mission is to try to provide a community of support where men can live in community with one another and can learn socialization skills, how to listen, how to communicate, how to express your needs. I had a call just this morning from one of my guys who's having a problem with one of his roommates making too much noise in the middle of the night. And my response is, well, did you talk to him about that? And lo and behold, actually he did. He said, yes, we had a conversation about it, but it hasn't solved the problem. And so, but at least I feel good that at least he went to he did take the first step of trying to communicate with him himself before he came to me with it. And that's what we're trying to teach is to problem solve, to figure out how to move forward. So in relationships, and therefore not have, big major problems. So My Father's House, we started with one house. And at the time I was still working a full-time job, and basically I was a volunteer. We've been very blessed to have to increase our size and also to get some grant funding, both from state and local funding agencies, from churches and some donors. And so things have grown considerably. I have been able to quit my day job and go to work full time for my father's house. That happened in 2021, which was it was a big boon for the company, because then I had the time to put into it to make it run. But also it was a great grace for me as well, because this is what I want to do, and I want to be able to focus on that. Around that same time, I had heard so there's a Brazilian prison system called the APAC Brazilian prison system. I'm not going to get into the whole. There's a big, huge history about that, and if you're interested in that, there's a film called Unguarded by Simonetta Wiener that you should watch. But I became very interested in that, and I met Simonetta, and we screened the film for the men at my father's house. This was during COVID. We screened the film, and she zoomed in, and we talked about that. And what we've done in the last few years is to enter into a partnership with APAC in order to bring some elements of that methodology to my father's house. The reality is that most of the elements that they have were already present at my father's house, but what we wanted to do is to do it more intentionally and more overtly, to make the men aware of what we're doing, and also to be more intentional with ourselves in bringing those things forth. Basically, the APAC prison system is based on Catholic social principles. It was formed by a Catholic lawyer who was doing prison ministry in Brazil many, many years ago, and then things grew. And again, there's a big history there that I won't go into, but those Catholic social principles are also at the heart and are the basis of what we're doing at my father's house. And so it's a very exciting project. It's also a big project to put it together and to make it come to life in our community, to explain it to the men in a way that they want to join in it, and really understand what we're trying to accomplish. And we're, the thing was created in a Brazilian context and in the context of private prisons. We are in an American context and in the context of a reentry organization where men are going out into the community and working and so forth. So there's some adaptation that needs to happen, and that we're in the midst of that, and that's all very exciting. And again, a big project. I've brought on some other full-time people to work with us. We have some volunteers. This year, we've formed a partnership with the Archdiocese of Denver, and they've assigned us a deacon as a chaplain for my father's house. Deacon Clarence Browd is our chaplain, and he's getting more and more involved, which is great. And I had a few conversations with the Archbishop of Denver. He came to our gala celebration last year, and he's become interested in and excited about the work at my father's house. So things are really moving forward fast and wonderfully, and we're very excited about that. This year, our big project is we want to form a company, a business where we can employ the men who live at my father's house, give them jobs, and also give them an opportunity to learn skills within the context of a job. It's called a social enterprise organization. It's a nonprofit, but it's basically a business that either makes a product or provides a service. And the idea is for us to form such a company. We're going to need funding, and it'll take a lot of work, but it's going to be a lot of fun too. So that's where we're headed this year.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. Again, we'll have a chance to come back to talk a little bit more about the model at my father's house, and perhaps some of your own journey and the process as we continue to think about some of these models being perhaps replicated in other parts of the country, which I think is of great interest to so many that are doing this work in reentry. So next up, we have Joshua Stansel. Joshua, after completing an 18-year prison sentence in North Carolina, earned a BA in English from Arizona State University. He launched a marketing and publishing company, Deep River Media, and just last year founded Living with Convictions, a 501c3 nonprofit that provides transitional housing to men and women starting over after prison. Joshua's writings have appeared in numerous Catholic publications, the Magnificat, Convivium. He is also the author of a forthcoming book that we'll definitely keep our eyes on here, titled Shakedowns, Shanks, and Shackles, A Writer's Guide to Prison Life. That's, love the title,
Oh.
Joshua. So Joshua, yeah, if you'll just share with us a little bit more about living with convictions.
Sure, sure. It's difficult to talk about living with convictions without first sort of explaining my own experience in prison. So, like Father Dustin said, I was in prison for 18 years. And the first 6 years or so, I was kind of delusional. I really thought I was going to be get back into court, be resentenced. I'm not going to do, this 18-year sentence. Year 6, however, reality, as it always does, reality wins, and it became apparent that no, I'm going to do this 18 years day for day, and it was kind of crushing. I had been looking for a book. I'd read excerpts from a book by Father Luigi Giussani, an Italian priest. And all I knew about him was that he had founded a Catholic movement called Communion and Liberation. And I didn't care anything about that. I just wanted this book. So I started writing around to different prison ministries, asking if anyone had ever heard of this priest. How can I order this book? And the long and the short of it is I finally got an email address to a man named Rick. Now in prison, the email address doesn't really do it doesn't do you any good. You don't have access to the internet. So I scribbled down a quick note, sent it to my mom, and asked her to email it for me. And I kind of forgot about it because, sometimes people will remember to do these things, sometimes they won't. But sure enough, she did, and he received the email, passed it on to a friend who sent me the book. And more importantly, a couple of people asked if they could come visit me to drive down from DC to North Carolina. It was about a 6-hour trip one way. And I thought, well, no, I don't want you to come visit. I'm just trying to buy a book. I don't want entanglements, that kind of thing. But as I often joke, I'm from the South and we're very polite. So I said, okay, sure, come visit. And they did. And it was an Italian woman who worked for the movement and a German professor at Catholic University. And anyway, we had a wonderful visit, and it was like I'd known them my entire life. And I'll just say, I remember very, very vividly the greeting. I didn't know what they looked like. They didn't know what I looked like. I walked into the visitation room, which was the prison dining hall. And I'm looking around. I don't know who to expect. Well, this woman hops up, comes over to me. This is the Italian woman, and she gives me the smooch smooch on each cheek, European greeting. Which threw me a little bit because, as you might imagine, we don't really get a lot of that in prison. That's not a typical greeting. Hey, junkyard, But anyway, we had a wonderful visit, and they left, and I thought, well, that was lovely, but there's some do-gooding Catholics on a goodwill tour of Southern prisons, and I'll never see them again. But that wasn't the case. I started getting visits from people from DC and New York every week. You didn't misunderstand. Every week, someone would drive down. And I was a little taken aback, very taken aback by this. And after about a year, Rick, the man who had originally received the email from me, he and his wife, who was pregnant at the time, Chiara, they came down to visit. And during the visit, they already knew that the child would be a girl, and she was due in a couple of weeks. And they asked if I would be the godfather of their girl. And I was stunned into silence. And then I just looked at them and said, you're aware I'm in prison, right? Is this really what you want to do? And they said yes. And anyway, when you're in prison and someone sits across that table from you and asks you to be the godfather of your child, your life kind of changes at that point. And you're being looked at in a way that is not typical. And they stayed with me for the 12 remaining years of my sentence and have stayed with me ever since. And it's really that experience that prompted me to found Living with Convictions. When I got out, I had a lot of breaks that I did not merit. I had a house to go to, I had transportation, I had work. And again, through no merit of my own. These are things that a lot of people simply don't have when they come out. And I thought, well, what do I do with this, with these breaks? I'm not going to bring peace to the Middle East. I'm not going to develop a cure for cancer. What can I do within the ambit of you know, my life? And I thought about some sort of nonprofit for housing. I knew housing was a problem, a serious problem in North Carolina. And I talked about it and talked about it, and my my girlfriend, I think, just got tired of hearing me talk about it, and so she sat me down with a whiteboard and a marker, and uh, sort of compelled me to sort of chart out a several month plan of when we were going to get stuff done, and we did. And so last summer, August 11th, the Memorial of St. Clair, we got approval from the state, and then in November 3rd. We got approval from the IRS. And that's significant because the day after I got the approval for the IRS, um, I had agreed to have lunch with a total stranger. A friend of mine had called me and she said, "Look, I just met this couple. They've just entered the church. They don't really know anyone. They're in your town. Would you have lunch with the husband?" And as happened in prison, like I didn't want to do this. I didn't want don't want entanglements. And but I'm from the South. We're very polite. So I said, "Okay, sure, fine." So we had lunch, and my only expectation really for the lunch was we'll have some nice Indian food, some spicy food. He'll tell me his conversion story. I'll tell him my conversion story, and then that'll be that. We'll agree to go to mass together, and that'll be fine. Well, it turns out he asked, what was going on in my life, and I told him I had just gotten the IRS approval. And he said, "Well, really, what's that about?" And so I told him about the nonprofit, and even that I had been in prison. I didn't know how that was going to go over. It seemed to go over fine. But I noticed he was getting a little red-faced, and I thought, well, maybe I've touched a nerve here. This is not, you don't know what someone's background is, what their past is. And he said, "Well, look, I'm going to try to get through this without crying, but I can't promise. I can't make any promises." Well, it turns out that he had been reading in the Gospel of Mark about the division of the judgment of the nations at the end of time. And, there's a famous passage, "When I was hungry, you fed me, and naked, you clothed me." And then that last little bit that's on there, "And when I was in prison, you visited me." And he said, I realized I've done all those other things, but I'd never done anything with prison. And I've just always wanted to, but I don't know how. Well, he said, "What are your plans for this nonprofit?" And I said, "Well, we want to have some transitional housing, but we're going to have to spend probably 5 years raising money to buy a house." Well, it turns out as a side gig, he flips houses. And he said, "Why don't I just flip a house, and instead of selling it, I'll just rent it to you?" And I said, "I'm open to that." Okay. So we opened our first house, this house right here, in March. Each of the houses takes the name of a saint. So this was Colby House, who was my confirmation saint, Maximilian Kolbe. For those who don't know, he died at the Auschwitz concentration camp. And he's a patron of prisoners and drug addicts. So the issue we ran into with this house is I was having to turn guys away. Because of its location, we can't take men with certain crimes. So we started looking at a second property, which we purchased or Matt purchased in July. And it was a fixer-upper, and we opened that one in October. That's St. Michael House. And we currently have 3 men there. And what we hope to do is basically to impart the same experience that I had in prison of being looked at in a very totalizing way, not dismissing the evil that's been done, the crime that's been committed, but also being aware that that's not the only worthwhile thing knowing about a person. A person is much more than, it's a famous saying, much more than the worst thing they've ever done. And we'll talk more about the APAC methodology a little bit later, but one of the impressive things about the APAC facilities in Brazil is there's a sentence above the entranceway to the prison, and it says, "The man enters here, the crime stays outside." And that's really how we look at it at our houses. That I'm not that concerned really about the crime. I'm more concerned about them recognizing that they do have a good heart, that there's something that can be generated, that there's the possibility of a new beginning. That's something you lose sight of in prison. It doesn't seem like new beginnings are really possible. It's a nice thing to hear, but not really possible. But we want to show them that that is possible. So we don't really have, and I'll just wrap up here. We don't really have a program in the sense of plugging someone into a program. As Father Dustin mentioned at the beginning, sort of approaching reentry from the standpoint of the gospel. And Jesus never plugged people into a program. He looked at them and really got to, he moved their heart and showed them that the reality is much greater than they think, and that the reality is ultimately positive. And that's ultimately living with convictions, what we want to do. And even the name, living with convictions, obviously there's a conviction of one has been sentenced to. So how do you live with that? How do you live with these criminal convictions? Because in America, at least, by and large, you can't get rid of them. You are a felon for the rest of your life. And what is the day-to-day of that like? And we want to remind people that reality is ultimately positive. That's what we do.
Very nice. Thank you, Joshua. Well, looking forward to, we'll open up the discussion here in just a minute. And already, I'm kind of formulating my own questions, but perhaps you all have questions too. And you can put them in the chat box in just a minute, a couple of minutes here. We'll get to the discussions and be able to hear a little bit more from Jim and Joshua as well. Before we do, just to say a few words about Joseph House, which is a reentry community here that I serve at here. And actually, I'm at Joseph House now. And Joseph House, and with Jim and Joshua, I love the fact that in many ways the dream for them was kind of birthed on the inside. For me, the dream was birthed by going and visiting those on the inside. Primarily going into solitary confinement camps here in Florida, North Florida. As a seminarian, I started off my prison visits while I was a seminarian studying for the Diocese of Pensacola, Tallahassee, and I was exposed to these brutal, inhumane conditions. There's just nothing else to say. The most barbaric places I've ever been, and as a good brother of mine here, would say that if there is a place across the street from hell, these confinement camps would be that place. Going in there and seeing the faces of so many of my brothers in these cells, it was hard for me to resist the desire for them to be able to have a beautiful space, a home, a community, a people to come back to. But unfortunately, certainly as Jim and Joshua know, so many of them barely even had an idea as to what would happen when they walked out the gates. Many of them anticipating that they would be in homeless shelters, they would be on people's couches, or within a year, they would be back in a county jail and then back to prison. So as I was kind of doing these rounds in these confinement dorms and already starting to think about what would it mean for the church to create a community welcoming so many of these brothers back into society, I had the great fortune, it was really providence that at the time of my visits, I was reading two books, essentially kind of almost, they were both on my bedstand at the time. I was reading Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy. And I felt as though what he was describing, I was living and visiting these confinement camps and hearing the stories of my brothers on the inside. And I was reading Pope Francis's Evangelii Gaudium, his apostolic exhortation. And what I found was that they were saying the same thing over and over again, Brian Stevenson and Pope Francis, that justice is becoming proximate, in close proximity to those that are the most marginalized, that justice is not an idea, it's not an ideology, but rather it is a movement to those that are the most marginalized. And far and away, in my life, and certainly in my adult life, the men that I was visiting, the men that I was visiting in these confinement dorms, were the most marginalized people I had ever met. Never heard the types of horror stories of growing up on the streets of Miami, Jacksonville, Tampa, Pensacola, like I was hearing from men, mostly African American men, and most of them under the age of 40, in the most horrific spaces in Florida's Department of Corrections. And so witnessing that, reading Bryan Stevenson, reading Pope Francis, I didn't think I had that much of a shot at being able to have a conversation with Pope Francis. So I sent an email to Bryan Stevenson one day on a whim and thought, yeah, he probably won't answer this email, but I'm going to send it out anyways. And just asked him, what can we do? What can I do? And people that are going into these prisons do, helping our brothers as they re-enter. And within 15 minutes, I got a very quick response from Bryan. And that began many years of learning from Bryan and from his staff at Equal Justice Initiative about what it means to do the work of accompaniment with those on the inside, with the plan and the intention to creating new structures that are more just and more merciful as they re-enter back into society. And so for many ways, with myself and some of those that were going into these prisons with me, Bryan Stevenson's work at Equal Justice Initiative became kind of, for us, kind of our model in a way, that this was going to have to be a work of personal gaining proximity to those that are in these cells, but it's also a work of justice. A work of, in my area, I think of it more in terms of racial justice, because so many of the men that we visit, that I serve in these confinement dorms, again, are young African-American men. So fortunately, our bishop decided to kind of more or less flip a house. Not quite the same way there with Joshua, but I had raised like maybe $5,000-$10,000 trying to find a house to create Joseph House. And I was going around having these, conversations with real estate agents with really hardly any money in the bank. And then out of the blue, our bishop decided to, you know what, we're going to buy a house. We're going to, you're going to pay $1 a month for mortgage, and let's dream big for the men that we're going to serve. And that's what we do. It's just we're doing actually renovations here at Joseph House. So there's banging, and I'm not sure if you hear that, but our smoke alarm just went off too. Anyhow, but so I'll just briefly say, kind of like with Joshua, I don't think of us as a program. It's more heavy on accompaniment, on relationships. I believe that relationships is essential in reintegration, the capacity for our brothers to trust us and for us to be able to trust them. And in that way, we end up creating a life together in accompaniment. And there's a much longer story there. And I'm sure we could talk. Well, I know I could talk for hours about the stories and the processes that we've developed here at Joseph House. But again, I say this, and hearing from Jim and Joshua, what I'm hearing is that there are so many of us that, when we our first movement and kind of the first move that we made in creating Joseph House was simply to pick a guy who was coming out of prison in our area and accompany him. And that's what we did. We didn't have a house. We didn't have too much money in the bank. We didn't even have an official 501c3, but we started accompanying Juan in his reintegrating back into society. And he taught us really just about everything we needed to do and we needed to know of the needs of those that are coming out of prison. So that's the story in a nutshell about Joseph House. And now I'd love to kind of open this up for comments or questions that you all may have. So let me pull this up here. I thought I saw a question um, up here. How many? Oh, yes. Karen has asked you, Jim, how many houses and men are there at my father's house currently? So, what's the current status for you all there in Denver?
Right. So we started with one house in 2018. We added a second house in 2020, and we added our third house this year. So we've got three houses, and each house has four men in it. It's very important to me that the men don't have to share a bedroom, that we don't put two men in a room. Um, Men who come out of prison have been living with somebody else for however many years. I lived with another man for 20 years in essentially a bathroom, a cell that was about 6 by 9 with a toilet in it. And I want the men to have somewhere where they can go and close a door and be by themselves when they need to. I want them to interact with one another for sure. I mean, it's a family atmosphere, and this is another reason that we want the house to have four men in it. If you put a man with just one other man in an apartment, it's really easy to ignore that guy. But you can't ignore three other people very easily. So you have to interact, and you have to learn to deal with conflict and issues and form relationships and friendships and sort of form a family. And so we put four, and then if it gets too big, if there's 8 or 10 men, well, then it becomes a facility. So we're trying to find this sweet spot where we have kind of a family atmosphere. And so, as I say, we have four men in each house. We've got a total of 12 at a time. We've served 52 men in 5.5 years, men who've gone on to find their own places. They've got jobs. None of our men are homeless. None of our men are without employment, other than those who are old enough to be retired. And not one of those men has returned to prison for committing a new crime. We have a couple of men who've gone back for technical violations, but we have a 0% recidivism rate for new crimes. Very proud of the men for that.
And maybe, while we're on that line of questioning, Joshua, maybe if you could say just a little bit about the kind of current status of living with convictions.
Sure. We've got the two houses. We currently have three men in each house. The newer of the two houses, St. Michael House, we do have one spot available. We're holding it at the moment because if someone I actually did time with is up for parole, and everyone is pretty convinced he will be paroled here maybe in the next month, and we are his parole plan. So we can't really give that room away without completely screwing up his chances at parole. I would like to sort of echo what Jim said. That was my experience as well. In terms of, you don't want to double up guys in a room if you can help it. I don't want them to feel that they've left one prison and just jumped into another one. We want to build, as Jim said, you want to build like a kind of a family relationship between the guys. And I've been very pleased to see that take shape, especially with the new house. There are times where I can't, there's about a 40-minute drive in between these two houses. They're in two different counties. And so I'm frequently not there. And one of the guys has done very well since he's been out. He bought himself a used car. And so he can take the other two guys around to the grocery store and that kind of thing when I can't be there. So they've developed a kind of a bond between the three of them. And assuming Gary is paroled and enters that house, I know he will fit right in. But that's sort of the status here. We generally, the paperwork they sign, when they enter the house, the program, for lack of a better word, is 12 months. But we explicitly say, obviously, you can stay much longer depending on your situation. Real estate prices are extremely high, even in the small town where we have St. Michael House. And it's just going to take guys longer to save up enough money to really get started on their own. And in that house, we have guys who, because of their crime, they're on a registry, making it even exponentially more difficult to find housing. And so we fully anticipate that the guys are going to be there probably much longer than 12 months. And we're totally fine with that. If we had 10 houses, we could fill all 10 houses. There's not a week, and I think Jim's got a waiting list, like a huge waiting list. I don't keep a waiting list, but there's not a week that goes by that I don't receive phone calls from case managers at prisons or I get guys call me because their probation officer gave them my number. But at the moment, we don't have any more space. But there's a huge need for this.
Yeah, no, I can echo that. Both Jim and Joshua, same here at Joseph House. Just so you know, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier. I live here in community with the guys here, and we've actually got another house that we're opening up, and we have another priest who's coming to live in community there. Father Joseph, actually, not the namesake for the house, but Father Joseph is from Uganda, and that to me, and that's what I'm hearing from, and I know a little bit more about my father's house talking with you before, Jim, that I think it sounds like for us, like kind of the secret ingredient to some degree is community, is some form of community dimension, maybe not, with different shapes and different kinds of dynamics to be sure. But, here we also, the same thing, each guy gets his own house. We really encourage them being able to create their own pathway, that there's no one way, or, we try to encourage them to find what that looks like, what reintegration looks like for them. And same thing with their timeline. We don't really have a set time, 6 months, a year. It tends to average out between a year to a year and a half for most of the men that come to Joseph House. But that changes according to the needs. And I think to me, this is kind of what I think is something different than what the halfway houses that I previously had visited, and trying to think of a model for Joseph House, was that it felt a little bit like a prison program. It just had the feel of a prison program. Even the furniture kind of had this kind of beige feel to it, that it felt like it was kind of an afterthought, and guys were really ready to get out of there as quick as they could, which I guess could be good and bad. So let me ask, because I kind of, obviously for me, it was somewhat easy in terms of, as a priest in the diocese, to kind of bring the diocesan life and community and structures to Joseph House. As a priest, I could kind of, enlist parishioners, obviously kind of with my relationship with Bishop Bill, who was a very easy sell with this because of his previous work in soup kitchens and his love of Dorothy Day and social justice and communities, building pathways for a more just society. That was easy. But perhaps Joshua, Jim, if you all could kind of share a little bit about, you kind of have a different, I guess a different way of developing this, in terms of you all developed it as one, having been formerly incarcerated yourselves, and then two, maybe not necessarily kind of at the hub of the kind of church hierarchy. So how have you engaged, or what have been the challenges and maybe the blessings in the ways that you all have engaged diocesan communities, your bishop, priests, parishes in your respective areas?
Well, so I founded my father's house while I was still on parole. And that raised some eyebrows and some questions, both with parole and with others. It was a difficult journey. I had the support of my own parole officer and her chain of command, but there were others in parole who were like, wait a minute, what is going on here? We've got a parolee who's housing other parolees. And that was something very foreign to them. They had no idea, why that was being allowed and how that was going to look. And there was concern that somehow this was shady or whatever. And the beauty of it is that over the last 6 years, we have developed a good reputation, and we have developed a good relationship with parole. I'm off parole at this point, and I've completed my sentence, and we have a very good relationship there. I also went early on to the Archdiocese and the Social Justice Office here in Denver, and also Catholic Charities, told them what I wanted to do. They were a bit skeptical, both from the perspective of, is this going to work from a business standpoint, and in terms of, who is this guy? And so they did not immediately jump on board and say, wow, how can we help? But we have, again, I think that we have shown over a period of years that we're, first of all, serious about helping the men who come to the house, and that we're serious also, frankly, about holding ourselves and the men who are there accountable. We're not here to just, some people will say, if this place is too cushy, then you're being too soft on these guys. We're not being too soft on the guys. What we're doing is we're showing them the love of Christ, which includes both that love and also a call to something greater, and a proposal of a new way of life. But I think that it's a matter of people seeing what we do and seeing how that looks, and recognizing that it's a legitimate way to do this. It's a beautiful way to do this. It's the human person at the center of this thing, and putting that person forefront, both in terms of how we look at him and explaining to him that that's how he ought to look at himself. That he needs to come to know himself and love himself in order to be able to move forward well. So, again, like you, Father, I could talk about this all day. So I'll let Joshua explain from his perspective as well.
At the diocesan level, we're in the Charlotte Diocese, which is a fantastic diocese. It's really flourishing. We have a terrific bishop. Oddly, there's really nothing at the diocesan level about reentry. But the good news is there's some people as we speak who are some deacons, I have a good friend who's a public defender down in Charlotte, and they're in the process now of putting together something at the diocesan level. I think, and I don't know, I can't speak for them, but my experience with other people, even in the Catholic world, is there's kind of an assumption that the state is handling this, or the city or the county, that someone is already taking care of this. Because I think people just instinctively know it's a need. You come out of prison, an apartment complex is not going to rent to you if you've just come out of prison after 20 years. And people just assume someone else is taking care of this. And so that's kind of a challenge to get people to understand. And just to be completely transparent, when Jim was saying that people were wondering, okay, he's on parole, but he started this thing. Is there something sketchy about it? I think anyone coming out of prison who does this sort of thing, there's just skepticism. People think there's got to be a con, at some level on this. And it takes a little while to get beyond that, to get people past that and to say, oh, this really is legitimate. There are people in the houses, and there's successes. I'm eager to see what develops with the diocese. I think it's going to grow, and probably grow pretty quickly. I've been able to make contacts and sort of network with other nonprofits within the state. Just very quickly, we have something here called a local reentry council. It was something backed by the state, but it's been slow to take off. So North Carolina has 100 counties. And so someone had the idea of there being kind of a cooperative in each county between law enforcement, city and state agencies, and nonprofits within that county to help with the reentry process. We have 100 counties, only 18 counties have local reentry councils. This house in this county, we have a local reentry council, and we're a member of that. The county where St. Michael House is does not have one, but I had a great meeting on Monday with some people who, one person at the DA's office and another person with a healthcare company, who are eager to start one. That's a tremendous help as well, the networking capabilities of that.
Very nice. I would like to, at this point, and this is something that comes up a lot with different organizations that I speak with, and especially attorneys looking for assistance for their clients will contact Joseph House, and perhaps Jim and Joshua, you've had the same thing happen. And oftentimes, increasingly more so, being asked, is there anything that you all do for women coming out of prison? And I know in our area that it is incredibly underserved, and and we don't really in the Tallahassee area, we don't really have anything close to what we're doing here. doing for men, there's not really anything that exists for women. And in fact, I'm kind of hard pressed to think of any really strong community in my state, in the state of Florida, that does this type of work for women coming out of prison. And yet it's increasingly, we're seeing more and more women with so many struggles in reintegrating back into society. So I'd like to ask and see if Kathy Johnson, if you're still on the call here, Kathy, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and talking a little bit about a woman's house and community. Yeah. Hi, Kathy.
Hi. Yes, we're very excited. Mississippi has a great need as well for women homes. And we have a lot of women who catch their charges in Mississippi, but they're actually from other states. And they literally do not know anyone in the state of Mississippi. So where do they parole to, or where do they go? And if they have nowhere to go, they stay. So that I'm speaking of like early release. They would not be able to early release if they had nowhere to go. And so we're really excited. I actually work for a organization called DePaul USA. We're in 10 states. And they just decided, and I'm from Mississippi, so they just decided to come into Mississippi. So I also served time. And when I got out, I actually went into a transition home. So I have a love and a passion and a heart for women and transitioning into a home. And for women, I like to definitely call it home. And we try to set the home atmosphere because I think women really need that type of welcoming coming from prison. And so we've just opened a home in Greenwood, Mississippi. It's called Madeline's House, and it houses 4 women. We have a case manager and we have a house manager. The house manager actually lives in the home. Only because there was so much controversy in opening a transition home in Mississippi. We had a 3-year battle, which is really sad, and but we finally got it. The doors opened and we got our home, and it's been amazing. They just opened a prison in Greenwood. They just moved women from Jackson prison into Greenwood. And so now the prison there houses up to 600 women. So you can see how great the need is. We could probably put up 20 houses and it not be enough. And so, but we are trying to do what we can. And so we've opened one house and we're fixing to open another home. And our program is 12 months. However, if they needed more than 12 months, that would be fine too.
And Kathy, you're in Greenwood, is that right? Did you say Madeline's house is?
Greenwood is where Madeline's house is.
Houses. No, because I know a few people that are looking for housing for some women clients there in Mississippi. So
okay, well,
I'll
we definitely need to
um,
share contact information.
This to me, I think is another future conversation is, with Kathy and others as well, just to talk about what are the similarities and yet the very stark differences between serving the needs of women that are coming out and the needs of men coming out. We know some of the basic needs are the same, but there's, it's a very different, different needs, different experiences, especially for so many of them that I know of that are single mothers.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
a whole other aspect of the work. Well, we're drawing kind of to an end here, but I quickly wanted to get to Zuri's questions here. Well, at least one. It looks like, Jim, I appreciate you answering the first question there. How can lay people assist in your endeavor? Either of you, Joshua, Jim, do either of you share your work with local leaders, local politicians, and kind of sharing a little bit about the needs of reentry, or how do you, is there any kind of, I know it's a loaded term, but kind of an activist kind of dimension to the work that you do within the kind of city communities in Charlotte or Denver?
I would just say for us, not yet. We're still kind of small and new. We just had, we just gotten these 2 houses up and running this year. But we definitely want to involve the community as much as we can down the road. Right now, we're just trying to make sure everything's stable, secure funding, and establish contacts with people in the community so that down the road we can have a lot more interaction and support and volunteer work. I think Jim mentioned they're needing mentors, and I think that's really key, and that's something that we would like down the road. Just for example, on financial literacy, guys coming out of prison, my experience is you're certainly not taught it in prison, and bad habits can develop in prison in terms of money management and whatnot. And so mentors are really, really needed. So that's something we would like to have down the road.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's very important to have somebody, a man, a woman, a couple come alongside these men who can develop an ongoing relationship with them. It's not just some expert that you bring in and they teach a class and then they leave, but you want them to form a relationship with this person so that they can begin to know what the man's needs are, and the man can begin to know them, and they can they can form a relationship of trust. And then when questions come up, immediately, the guy says, well, I should call so and so because that's my mentor, and he or she knows the answer to this question. As far as sharing with local politicians, journalists, I mean, we have had some media contacts, mostly with Catholic media. We've done interviews. I've done interviews with CNA and the Community Liberation newsletter a couple of times, and some different things. I was on Al Cresta's show at one point. So we do those as they appear. We don't necessarily seek them out. We have begun networking with people that we think will be open to what we're doing and not freak out. And so we're cautious, frankly, about that. We don't just sort of wander down the street screaming it from the rooftops, but we do want to reach out to people who are that are going to respond well. In terms of advocacy, Father, we're not interested in advocacy. We're not interested in trying to get on our soapbox and change the world. What we want to do is to change these men's lives, and that's what we're focused on. So,
yeah, and I'm sure there's ways of doing the advocacy piece in a way that is both attending to the needs of the people that you serve and at the same time recognizing social structures that need to change, because God knows eventually we want to stop incarcerating so many people. So how to do that in a way that's not a firebrand kind of approach, but at the same time to be able to be a place that we can educate so many in our society that just seem to have a very kind of law and order mentality of the criminal justice system, which, as we know, is a far cry from the reality. Things are a bit more messier. Well, this is, again, obviously, this is a conversation that my guess is will continue, certainly among us. And I would hope that, yeah, more of you, as you venture out into the necessary work of accompanying our sisters and brothers as they are reentering back into society, that you share some of your insights and your models and your approaches and the challenges that you have in your ministry as well with us at CPMC. So thank you, Jim, and thank you, Joshua, for your witness, and really for the incredible kind of hopefulness that I kind of sense from both of you, to kind of come from having been on the inside and taking on this work is, I don't know, it's an incredible kind of witness that I believe more of us in the church need to hear your stories. And if I dare to say, your boldness in talking about the importance of mercy in this work. So God bless you, God bless you and your communities, your vocations, and the work and the mission that you all are involved with. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We're at the end here. And again, we pray for each of you and your blessings and on your ministries, the work and the communities that you all serve as well. So may God bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you. Amen. All right. God bless.